Alrighty, gamers. So nowadays, tier 4s are basically the benchmark for if a character is good or not. And so I thought it would be fun to do a tier 4 tier list only. Just for the tier 4s in the game. We have 83 of them in the game now. So this one is going to be focused on PvP. I will go through and make comments about each individual PvP game mode. And, you know, more so leaning towards the ones that I play rather than ones that I don't play. But I will give you guys, you know, as much information as I can without making the video like 3 hours. And then we'll do a follow-up video, possibly tomorrow, possibly in a couple of days, for the PvE side of things. But this is essentially, this is like a tier 4 ranking video, but only for tier 4s, tier list. And then now it's going to be through the lens of PvP. So for those of you that have wanted a tier 4, a tier list divided into PvP, PvE, hopefully this can satisfy you guys, at least for the time being. So I've already started off the list by just aggregating all of the characters that have essentially 0 or near 0 PvP value. And this is not to say that these characters are bad. You can see some very, very meta characters in here like Luna, Scarlet Witch, Thor, Sharon. There's some very strong characters in here. But they just don't have any PvP value. They don't have iframe ignore, they don't have reflect, they don't have revive, they don't have immortality, they don't really have any of those tools that you'd need in order to be good at PvP. There are a few outliers here and there, like Miles has the Giga Dodge artifact, like Spider-Man and Black Widow, so he could be good for PvP one day. We know Ant-Man famously was good for PvP once upon a time with the 80% guaranteed dodge on a buff. But again, time will have to tell for these characters, but for the time being, I would say if you're building these characters for PvP, you're kind of doing it for a meme, which is okay. Just know that you're doing it for a meme. We can also get out of the way the absolute top tier, the tippy top. Now, these characters are just going to be insane for all PvP game modes. It doesn't matter which one we're talking about. So whether we're talking about, you know, Alliance Conquest, Team Battle Arena, the new game mode, whether we're talking about Timeline Battle, whether we're talking about Otherworld Battle, these characters are just God mode. So any of these characters are just going to dominate those game modes, and you're going to see them everywhere. And you're going to see that as long as they're not banned, right? That's really the only thing. And even then, even when they're banned, these characters can still find ways, or I guess not banned, but like soft banned or debuffed. These characters still find ways to appear. So they're in a league of their own, and there's no other character that's going to go up on this list because no other character is good for all PvP game modes the way that these 5 are, and to the extent that they basically set the meta, right? The meta revolves around them, and everyone else is just sort of trying to figure things out. Now, these characters are ranked individually. So if you have nobody else on the team, right? If it's Sentry plus 2 Garbage Men, and then, you know, Null plus 2 Garbage Men, etc., etc., etc. That is how they are ranked. I know that Null is better than Sentry for a lot of you guys with Agent Venom and a team-up collection, but that's kind of a lot to balance out. So I am going to be ranking these characters individually for PvP, not based on the number of supports or which supports they have access to. That wouldn't really make sense. That wouldn't really be fair. This is how I see this meta existing. And this is basically, you know, this is how it balances out between sort of the top tier boys. After that, after these 5, you do have a lot of characters that come in and are good, but not good enough, essentially. And these characters, will rank them individually, but they're basically, you know, they struggle in some way, in one way or another. And they're not going to really, they're not really going to dominate the way those top 5 do, but they can do well for you when some of these characters, or possibly all of those characters up top there, are banned. And you still see these characters a lot in PvP, because nowadays you do need a lot of characters. You do need like a larger array of characters for PvP. But yeah, I would say that these are the ones. You could maybe make an argument about Weapon Hex here. But yeah, these are the characters that I would say, you know, you're going to see the most. In terms of where I would balance them, I would probably put them somewhere around here. This is tough. Yeah, I would probably do it something like this. Yeah. So I think Thanos is really the first one that pops up. Thanos is actually better in certain situations. I think he's pretty good for 3-on-3 because of how strong his leadership is. So you can put him with some villains, and he does really, really well because he gives them cleanse as well as attack and defense. We've gone over, several times how good Hela is. Madeline with the immortality, along with Carnage and Deadpool, are basically just lesser versions of our immortality bros up here. And they're very, very good, and they're versatile in the sense that you have a blast, a combat, and a speed. And again, it's no coincidence here. You have universal, right? You have the 4 typings here for immortality. And they sort of play rock, paper, scissors with each other. But in some cases, if you match them properly, they can punch up. Deadpool actually has the most success punching up against Adam, whereas Carnage is going to struggle. There's no speed type here, but Carnage is going to struggle just due to not having enough damage. And then Madeline still struggles to kill Wolverine because he's just so tanky, and Madeline actually kind of lacks damage. Yeah, and then the rest there. Magic is pretty good, but she's sort of like a lesser version of Madeline. I think she maybe has more damage, but less defense, less crowd control. And then Doom is kind of in the middle. He can definitely punch up in certain content, but overall, he's going to do poorly, like compared to these top tier guys here. Now, as far as like the team battle arena and otherworld battle and conquest, this is probably still how I would rank these characters. I do give a little bit more weighting to Hela because of her flexibility as a support. Some people would even put her up here because she can really shift the team dynamic whenever you have more than a one-on-one situation. And even for one-on-one situations like timeline battle, you can still have a situation, you can just have a team setup where if you're running heroes, right, if you're running like a sentry double support and you're not running Hela, you can get punished by teams that are running Hela, for example, like Null Hela, Agent Venom, or something like that. So I'll put Thanos there just because he does bring a little bit more offense than Hela does. But Hela's an interesting case as well because if she survives, given her immortality, if she survives until she can charge up her tier 3, she one-shots pretty much any character. It does tremendous damage. It has an insane AoE. So I'm probably going to talk myself into, ranking her up, like giving her this spot here. But I actually think it does go to Thanos. As far as how these characters perform in one-on-one situations, the rankings are still pretty similar, but I do think that Deadpool performs a little bit better, so I would probably move him up here, and I would probably move Hela down. Hela's pretty bad for one-on-one scenarios, again, because she just doesn't have the time to charge up her tier 3, so she's kind of dead in the water. You can play her manually, and you can get away with some stuff here and there, but overall, I think the list is still pretty similar for one-on-one versus the 3-on-3 situations that you're going to get into in either Conquest, Otherworld Battle, or Team Battle Arena. But yeah, this is essentially how it breaks down for the upper echelons of PvP. Everybody else is, like, it's a pretty big step down from S to A, and then it's a little step down from A to what I would consider like the B tier. And this is where we can kick it off with characters like Apocalypse, who are good, and like Zombie Captain America. He's good, but he really needs a specific team comp to shine. And they also have sort of inconsistencies in their performance. You can also put Jean in here. She has faded a lot in PvP lately, but she's still okay. I don't know if I would put Cap above the Spider-Man Black Widow combo, but he does see a lot more use with the zombie team up. Spider-Man kind of just doesn't see a lot of use these days. He just doesn't have defensively enough juice. You can also see Ghost Rider here in limited runs. Probably put him a little bit behind Jean, but this is questionable. Jean does have the revive. He has the immortality. He really only works against villains. She is sort of a bit more flexible that she can work against heroes and villains. But that pretty much does it. You could... It's tricky. We kind of have to bring a new category in. I'm going to put Quicksilver up here with these guys, even though he is a bit removed. There is a bit of a gap between him and Ghost Rider. We can just set up another category underneath for kind of what's going to end up being the remaining characters here. But Quicksilver he's not bad, honestly. You know what? Actually, I'll put him up here. He's not bad. Again, he like most speed types, he's really only going to be used for either targeting blast types or targeting characters that don't have ignore dodge built into their kit. But that basically does it. I think this is essentially for actual like PvP DPSs. You're essentially looking at the list here of characters that are useful these days. It's basically just this. It's a pretty tight list, I would say. And yeah, this is really what's going to carry your account for most PvP content. Now, if we add in another row below this and we call this like, D+, something like that, we can bring in another category of characters that, we could sort of balance it out. But I think here you kind of need to highlight all of the support characters. So support is obviously a tricky situation for PvP because you don't always need it, but when you do need it, it can be as important as your DPS. So it's something that you need to calculate based on your opponent, based on, what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, it really comes down to those factors and what kind of enemies you're attacking and what kind of results you're trying to get. But these are basically the supports, and we'll balance them out. Cyclops is technically a support, which is kind of crazy. We'll sort of balance them out based on or sort of rank them based on how much they're really providing and also who they're providing the buffs to, because that's an important thing to consider. It's not only how good their buff is, but then, where do you see them in PvP? Because if you really don't see them very often, like these three at the bottom, then it doesn't really matter. So hopefully that makes sense there. But yeah, honestly, even Beta Ray Bill, I think Beta Ray Bill probably just needs to go in D. I was debating putting him in the support category, but I think it's a bit unrealistic. I think he has to go in the sort of D category. And that's kind of, that makes sense there. So as far as the supports go, by far the best tier 4 support is Agent Venom. Just head and shoulders away. He enables so many symbiotes to become, like Carnage can almost punch up. He's like A+ tier. Spidey jumps up to A tier. Black Widow jumps up to A tier. Silver Surfer with Agent Venom can punch up almost against everyone else there. It really is a tremendous support. But Nick Fury's not far behind. I think a lot of people underestimate Nick Fury, giving super armor, giving a bunch of buffs to heroes, allowing them to shred villains. So you can pair up a Nick Fury with like a Wolverine if you're trying to take down a Thanos or a Silver Surfer or a Null or a Carnage team that you're having difficulty with. Very, very good support there. Obviously, I know there's a bunch of other good supports that are not tier 4able, like Coulson, Colossus. Yeah, I'm aware of those, but we're just focusing on that. Although Echo is not the most used tier 4 support, she is insanely good for the speed class. And you can basically make a whole archetype around her lead with like Deadpool and Quicksilver or Spider-Man and Quicksilver or something like that because of how insane her lead is, right? She's basically just the speed version of Thanos, and she's just not good enough on her own. But if they gave her a buff like they gave Thanos, if they made her as strong offensively and defensively as Thanos, that speed team would be a huge problem. And it's basically just her own weakness or sort of lack of capability DPS on her own that's kind of holding back that whole team there. Invisible Woman is used a lot for her cleanse. She's okay offensively, but really is not going to bring a lot to the table. She kind of gets one-shotted pretty frequently, and you can't pair her with Franklin because then you're losing out on basically 2 spots. But the cleanse is useful, and it's much more used than Angel's cleanse, even though they're basically identical. So just keep that in mind. All cleanses are not equal just because they're cleanses. Ebony Maw is probably not used very often. He does have the universal thing. People forget that. They focus on the artifact for basically just Black Swan, who's not tier 4. But it's a pretty useful ability, mostly in timeline battle. I think outside of timeline battle and some stuff in Conquest where you don't use tier 4s, like when you're using other members of the Black Order, I think he can be used there. But for things like Otherworld Battle, for things like Team Battle Arena, I think you're going to struggle to find much use for him unless you're specifically targeting a universal team because of his buffs against universals. You can use him to dodge the Molecule Man sort of workaround, so that is useful there. And it does make him a little bit better in that case versus universal, since 3 of the 5 at the top are universal there, and then you have 1, 2, 3 more on the second row. But just not a lot of usage because there's so much more balance between typings. And although these can be countered by Molecule Man, Mystique, and Taskmaster, they do give you more sizable chunks, and they're more flexible, giving you damage versus heroes and villains, just giving you like a blanket coverage, which is quite nice. Although they themselves are kind of useless, so you're not going to see this on a lot of teams. Usually it's like more budget builds that are going to be using these supports, but they're not bad. Ancient One, Honestly, Wong is better just because he pairs so well with like Doom, with Magic, with even the Zombies team if you wanted to do that. So I actually do see more Wong than I see these other guys here. Beast I actually do see quite a bit now because of the HP, but it's really just the ignore dodge and the HP, just making characters like Sentry and Wolverine insanely tanky, just despicably tanky. And then at the end here we have the two robots, and then Riri Williams. Riri Williams is the newest addition at tier 4. Her buff doesn't really, like, it's just the ignore dodge because the increased damage to boss types doesn't really matter. So honestly, you could put her in D tier, but it is technically a buff. She is technically a support. So it's actually more like a beta ray build situation. For these guys here, they do give damage to villains as well as HP and I think in defense. So they're both good. The problem with them as supports is there's just no machine types, right? There's no machine types up at the top here who can utilize these buffs. Iron Man is not good for PvP. Doctor Doom does not have machine tag. So there's just nobody. Now, if we got an insane machine tier 4 like Sentinel, or if for whatever reason they added Galactus to the game and they made him machine type, I'm not saying they would, but I'm just saying, then these supports would be much more valuable because they're actually very strong supports because they apply to all Technokinetic allies. But because there are no Technokinetic allies that are useful, it's basically a meaningless support, but it is a support nonetheless. After that, we have basically the rest of the characters here. I know this list looks crazy, but I will try to rank it in terms of how valuable they are. I do consider these characters less valuable than most of the supports, at least the first like 6 or 8, just because they're so niche. They require tremendous investment, and ultimately what you're getting in return for that investment is not very good. It's just not very good, I'll be honest. So yeah, these are like the leftovers. These are like the pseudo PvP characters, or basically like the PvP characters that the devs didn't try hard enough to make good for PvP. We can add Namor, or we can add for sure Rogue to not PvP, absolutely. But characters like Bishop, characters like Yelena, characters like Winter Soldier, this sort of thing. Punisher's actually pretty good. I'd probably put him there. X-23 is actually not bad. But again, not bad in the context of like this lower class of PvP characters. We're not talking about X-23 is going to wake up one day and start like killing Madeline, right? Even though with the type advantage, it's going to be very, very difficult. Even Hulk these days doesn't have much more than some current PvPs, but not too much. But yeah, even with like PvP builds, even with PvP stats given to these characters, they're really not going to do too much. Gladiator's honestly not bad. Odin's honestly not bad. Doctor Strange, funny enough, with the, I think only for Otherworld Battle, but I will give you guys this tip because I have seen it used. Only for Otherworld Battle with the full zombie team. And with other buffs that affect him, he can actually be good because he has iframe ignore on his artifact, and he'll get 7 seconds of immortality anyways. So you can chuck him in at the front there, and he can actually blow up some characters because he just does so much damage and he has so much AoE. Obviously not good, but just a funny little quirky setup. And if you pair him with, like, if you do a full zombie lineup, right? I have the other, I have Captain America Sam Wilson here, but if you have the zombie Sam Wilson, that buff stacks with the magic buff from Wong, stacks with the other buff that she gives to them against heroes and villains. So you're talking like 150% increased damage to heroes and villains on Doctor Strange there with the full zombies team. It's bonkers. So yeah, that actually is a possibility. I haven't seen it, but Crescent does have Reflect, so that is something worth something. We know Captain Marvel, the infamous 4th skill iframe ignore. A lot of people don't know this, but Black Bolt has iframe ignore. Yeah, when he gets debuffed, he cleanses himself for 12 seconds, and he gets 4 or 5 seconds of iframe ignore for all of his skills. Like, it's just a buff. So you can actually set him up on a team. It's usually just for Conquest. It's not for anything else. But on a lower end Conquest team, you can actually use him as like a quick burst to like knock, just like burst down some opponents. You do have to sort of set up the team properly, and you have to make sure that he's pointing at the person you want to kill for Conquest. The sort of, it matters, right? Like if he's fighting across, he's going to miss, and he's going to get distracted and then die off before he can do damage to the character that he's supposed to do damage to. But that is an actual real piece of tech that you can use. I think Venom probably deserves to be in D tier, but because he's a symbiote and he has access to all those buffs, and he actually has a lot of HP from his artifact and his other stats, I think, you know, I haven't really seen anything, but I think for a very low-end Alliance Conquest team, you could have some fun there with him. Spider-Gwen probably deserves to be a little bit higher. She has iframe ignore, I believe, on her artifact, and she has counter on her second skill or third skill. So she actually has quite a few weapons. Yeah, she has counter and iframe ignore on her third skill, as well as more iframe ignore capabilities on her artifact. So I actually think she deserves to be a little bit higher, maybe even up here. Yeah, I actually think that's where she deserves to be. Shadow Shell is really just for the team up with blue, like basically just, you know, Blue Dragon, but it's not really, it's not much, honestly. It's really not very much. She doesn't have a lot of PvP weapons there. Namor just for the buffs, the AoE buffs for Conquest and maybe Otherworld Battle, but even then, I think this is a stretch. Probably deserves to be down here in D tier with Venom. Just keep that in mind. Iron Man, again, just limited burst damage potential, but you'd have to give him a destruction because he doesn't have penetration, I believe. But with his tier 4 buff giving him offense and defense and increased damage below 30%, honestly, Iron Man can really you know, can really burst down. But yeah, it's sort of like it's kind of a D tier thing. To be honest, a more accurate ranking would probably be that. I just wanted to highlight those characters briefly. Same thing with Storm, and then Red Guardian probably should be in D tier, but technically, I don't know, man. I don't know. He's really bad. He's really bad. I would honestly put him in D tier. But yeah, so that is all 83 tier 4s ranked for PvP, with every PvP game mode highlighted as best as I could. Keep in mind that the ranking is set from left to right, so that, you know, I am saying that the 6th best is Thanos, and I am saying that whatever after Weapon Hex would be Apocalypse. But also keep in mind that the distance between these categories is not always the same. I think there's at least like a 2 gap, a 2 phase or 2 tier gap between S and A, and there's probably a 1 tier gap between A and B, or half a tier gap between A and B. C is just for supports, and then there's like there's a pretty massive gap. There's probably like at least a 2 tier gap between B and D+, just because of the performance of these characters. But yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of the tier 4 PvP tier list and all the tips I gave you guys, if that was helpful, and if you're looking forward to the PvE tier list side of things. Thank you so much for watching the video. Smash the like button if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.